Hey folks, welcome back to the Mac and Mike show. I'm Mac and he's Mike, and ne'er the twain shall meet, as they say frequently. Um, Mike and I are going to talk about something, I don't know, a little bit, maybe it's apparent to everybody. I don't know. Maybe it's not important to most people. But I brought it up to Mike, and Mike seemed to be accepting of talking about this topic. And the topic is, what is the value of political parties in today's election? Once upon a time, political parties ruled the roost, so to speak. Um, Political parties and their shenanigans, and the whole idea about the smoke-filled back rooms were based on the political parties making decisions about who was going to be running for candidate and who wasn't, et cetera. And I think it was George Washington, in very early on in our nation's history, said to be very, very suspicious and careful of, political organizations and party trappings and tripping. And to be honest with you, I've been involved with the Republican Party locally in my district for 30 years, maybe longer, 85, longer than 30 years, I guess, 40 years. Um, but this past election, I noticed a couple of things. This past primary election we just held in Pennsylvania, and there were many other states that did primary elections this past week. Um, every one of the Donald Trump-backed candidates won their primary election. Many of them ran against Republican incumbents. That didn't matter. Didn't matter. The Republican Party machine was behind them. The challenger had the endorsement from Donald Trump, and they won. As a matter of fact, Mitch McConnell, who once was the Republican leader of the Senate, the U.S. Senate, most recently no longer the leader, but I'll call him the dinosaur of the Republican Party. He's been around the U.S. Senate so long that he needs help walking down the hallways. And he was defeated in his primary election again by a candidate who was endorsed and backed by Donald Trump. I think I think that, at least from the Republican Party side, that the the Republican Party is now the party of Donald Trump rather than the generic Republican Party. I don't know who I can point to on the Democratic side, but I think Democratic perspective, what I'm seeing is the Democratic Party is having a very, very difficult time settling on and arriving at the right candidates for their various positions. And I'm not sure that unwillingness or inability to line up enough support behind a single candidate for various offices um, doesn't indicate a failure of the Democratic Party as well. So I guess the question I'm posing, Mike, and I'll ask you to hop in here, the Republican Party, because it doesn't seem to belong to the party anymore, but rather follows Donald Trump's lead. The Democratic Party, because maybe it's because of a lack of true leaders in their party, but they seem to be having a very, very hard time coalescing behind an individual candidate for an individual office. And therefore, with this diffusion of multiple candidates running, the Democrats are having a different problem, but it still points to the weakness of the Democratic Party, just like a different but serious weakness in the Republican Party. You have some thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, you were right when you said about George Washington. It's found in his farewell address letter that he talked about the dangers of political parties. But he thought there was an open possibility that it could work with the new constitution and new government. But he was still, skeptical. And I say that every day. You have not met my friend Richie, but you've talked online with him.
Hmm.
And he's a former Republican, now calls himself a disenfranchised Republican. He's not a Democrat. He doesn't care for the Democrat Party. He hates what he calls MAGA, which kind of lends itself to what you're saying is Trump is now the new head of a new, almost new party. Might as well call it MAGA instead of Republican. And parties do change their names throughout history. Remember the Whigs and or the others. I don't recall them all. But we all live in this gradated scale. We may be hardcore in some subjects, but not in all. Whether it's, foreign policy, domestic policy, economy, social questions, and people are scattered, and that's why the fastest growing party in America is the independent, The
Or the
problem,
unaffiliated. A lot of people are choosing to not register any party.
right, and each state handles it their own way. You can call yourself an independent, unaffiliated, and of course, the difficulty there is you can't vote in a primary in a lot of states like Pennsylvania
Sure.
for, like, I'm a Republican, you're a Republican. We just had the primary. I have to vote for the Republican hierarchy. Other states allow you to cross over, but then the danger there is when you're talking about party affiliation is that a bunch of Republicans can go in and vote for the worst Democrat candidate or vice versa.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know what it would look like just as an open primary. What do they call that? And they have it in California. What is that called? Do you know?
They
It's
use different names. In New York, they have,
a,
18 different political parties. So
a
yeah,
jungle primary, it's called.
yeah.
And that means theoretically, two Republicans could end up going against each other for the gubernatorial uh,
Top
election.
top two, right? Top two are selected in the primary.
Yeah. So, I mean, would a system like that work? Because now you're just talking about two people with slightly different ideas. I think it would be good to get rid of parties, but then you would lose that consolidated power structure that you're talking about. The
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
money and the party, but that could be a good thing. You just mentioned a friend of mine, John Ventry, running for lieutenant governor here in Pennsylvania. He couldn't get anywhere because he didn't have the clout from the Republican Party. If there were no parties, maybe he would have stood a better chance. I mean,
Right.
I don't even know anything about his opponents, so I can't judge who would have been the better character. But yeah, it's an interesting theory. I don't
Well,
know if you
I'm
tried
not,
it.
I don't know, I'm not advocating for, nor would I even know how to go about getting rid of the parties. I don't think that's really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the parties dying a slow death all on their own. I'm talking about the parties not being able to bring any real clout to the election. I'm talking about the parties not being able to deliver grassroots, you know, the famous Nancy Pelosi one time said, the Republican Party is not grassroots, instead it's AstroTurf. And what she meant by that was that the Republican Party were paying people to show up to various campaign and election events. And while that was true for the Democrats, it was not true for the Republicans. I don't know if any Republican ever got paid to be at a political event. But my point in calling that out is that once upon a time, the parties were able to, in a large manner, be able to bring people out to support candidates. In some ways, that's still true in the Democratic side from this perspective. Many times, unions will pay people to go to political events to be the background of the supporters who are supporting a particular candidate. I don't know, I've never heard of Republicans doing a similar thing, but if you look at the SEIU and which is the uh, personal care and healthcare, a lot of times unions, a lot of those people are very, very politically active. And there's others, the teachers union. Every year we get complaints about the teachers union being too influential in the Democratic Party. The woman who's the head of the teachers union in the United States of America. I mean, I think she has an office in the Democratic headquarters. I mean, every time you see the Democrats anywhere, she's there as well. So it's powerful unions that can that can find ways to pay people to get them to vote a certain way or to show up to a certain, but I don't know of anything like that on the Republican side. But let me just call out in my small area, we have 27 precincts where Republican committee man and committee woman is selected. That's 54 people in my little community. When I say little, it's 55,000 people, but that's not small. But and we elect those people during the primary election because once you're selected in the primary election, you have no competition in the general election, so it's the only person you vote for. Out of the 27 seats in our local political division, 15 of them were vacant. Sometimes it was either the man or the woman that was vacant, but many of those places had no man nor any no committee man or committee woman on the ballot. And that's unheard of. In the past, there have been elections where multiple people competed for those positions because once upon a time, it was considered pretty prestigious to be one of the two members, committee man, committee woman, in your particular precinct for the Republican Party. The Republican Party was much more strong, of course, in those days. Pennsylvania is now very much purple. It's not red or blue so much as it's different colors, different shades of purple, different times. But to me, having 15 of the 27, that's more than half of the committee people were vacancies. And that indicates to me that the people aren't interested in playing the political game anymore. And if you take that, and this is a pretty strong Republican area, or it has been historically, maybe it isn't anymore. But if you take that kind of results at the local level and turn that into multiple different local levels all over the state, all over the various states, now what you're talking about is a political party that no longer has grassroots people to go out and knock on doors and hang literature and hand out literature to their neighbors or go to the polling place on election day and ask people to vote a certain way. And isn't that what candidates look for from the political parties? If they can't depend on candidates come to a political party expecting one of two things and sometimes both. They either expect contributions, that is money, so they can run advertising, or they expect people who will show up and work for them, hand out literature, get names on petitions, knock on doors and ask personal favors for people to consider their candidate. If candidates can't get that from the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, what good are they?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think we went through that before just recently. I guess you and I were both well, it seems like recently, it was years ago. You and I were working for two different gubernatorial candidates here in Pennsylvania in the
Yes.
Republican primary. And yeah, finding the support from a party prior to the election is another big thing. I think your candidate was more or less the endorsed Republican, wasn't he?
Yes.
And so, my candidate was, kind of flailing out there on his own. I mean, we actually came close, but yeah, we didn't have the money and the resources and the party behind us. But, I'll still say to this day, I personally think Paul was a better candidate, but that's okay. And again, these are just differences of idea. Good men differ. Not
Hmm.
saying that your candidate wasn't a good man. Just, there's better and worse. One of my friends said, I don't belong to a party. I don't vote by party. I vote against the other person, is how he said he votes. And I thought that was kind of that. You met him. That was Woody.
Yeah.
And
Mike, I try to choose the best candidate. I'm not locked into Republican or Democrat. I try to pick the best person for the job. When I have a quandary as to who to choose, I usually default to the Republican Party candidate because each of the two parties has a platform, and they have these are the things that we believe in. And when you look at the platform for the Democratic Party and platform for the Republican Party, they're different and they value different things. The Democrats, at least Joe Biden's administration, was for open borders, let anybody come in that wants to. Um, the Republican Party was for legal immigration, but not illegal immigration. When it came to abortion, the Democrats wanted to have abortion up till the point in time that the baby was born. They even considered having live children that had been born unlived so that that could be called an abortion as well. The Republican Party wanted to have reasonable restrictions on abortion. Their tax policies are different. Even now I can hear Mondami and AOC yelling, let's, you know, tax all the billionaires to pay for everything. If you took all the money from all the billionaires in existence in the United States, you still wouldn't have enough money to pay, to pay for what they want to spend. So when I have a quandary as to who the better person is, I default to the Republican Party being more closely aligned to my ideas than the Democratic Party. You know, um, John Kennedy was a Catholic and he was a Democrat and he ran for president. In those years, in the late 50s and early 60s, everybody I knew that was affiliated with the Catholic Church was a Democrat. And they were Democrats because John Kennedy was a Democrat and he was president. And it was that simple kind of connection that sounds silly today, but it was enough back then. Um, it John Kennedy had to go to the National Baptist Convention and make a speech telling the Baptists that he would not take order, if he were president, he would not take orders from the Pope of the Catholic Church. And that seemed kind of quaint and ridiculous now, but that's what he had to do in order to overcome the Democratic uncomfortableness with anybody who might be beholden to somebody other than America and its Constitution. But Mike, despite the platforms of the party being significantly different, I'm looking at it from a tactical perspective. When I say, do we need political parties anymore? One of the things political parties used to do is they used to raise money for candidates. Now there are so many organizations looking to raise money for various candidates that it's impossible to count them all. You have no idea how many requests for donations I received from Michelle Tafoya, who's running for a congressional seat in Minnesota. Why would anybody think that I would want to donate money to a candidate in Minnesota? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But because I'm on a list, having donated money in the past, and sometimes sizable sums to candidates that I liked, um, they share my name. They share my name with everybody who falls on that side of the aisle. And I think that kind of outreach also hurts political parties. I'll tell you a funny story. A friend of mine lives in Lancaster County, as a matter of fact. Years ago, there was a campaign being run by Hillary Clinton, and what the heck was the name of the group? Let It Go or What Does It Matter, something like that. And my buddy encouraged me to sign up for their campaign literature, and they sent out a little pin to everybody, so you could wear that pin theoretically when you went to a campaign event. And I wish I could remember what the name of the group was. Anyways, I've been on the Democratic Party list for the last, since Hillary Clinton ran for president. And I just now, over the past couple of weeks, I've unsubscribed from every single political party group that's sending me stuff. And as you can imagine, once wish I one of the Republican is win red, but the Democrat, oh, it had to do with with Bill's what does it matter? Who cares? Something like that. I forget what her program was. But the bottom line is that I must have been receiving 30 or 40 political emails, text messages, whatever, various stripes for the last 20, 30 years. And systematically, I'm unsubscribing from all of them. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear the noise. Do you know what, Mike? I don't believe the politicians anymore.
I'm with you. They all lie. I mean, the old joke is, how do you know when a politician is lying? Mouth is open.
Lips are moving, yeah.
So,
How did we get here, Mike? Does it make sense that will the political parties cease to exist? Let me say this. They will cease to exist when they no longer have any power and influence. When is that going to be? Do they have power and influence now still? Do they?
yeah, I think they do still. I mean, it's just where they funnel the money. They always talk, the talking heads are always talking about how much the political parties have cash on hand.
Yeah.
It usually matters in the general election, every 4 year for president, because that's, cost $1 billion or more. And I wonder, it's a good question. I wonder, could they raise that kind of money without the parties? Could the super PACs just do it on their own? Oh no.
That's an interesting question, Mike, because the super PACs do a lot of. Now, the thing about a super PAC is a PAC is not supposed to coordinate its advertising with the candidate.
Right.
Now, do they? I don't know. Are there intermediaries somewhere or somehow that get involved that maybe do that? I hope they don't, because I don't think they want to go to jail. And I think they would go to jail if it was able to be proven. But Mike, there was an airline that just went bankrupt. Was it JetBlue? Maybe
Spirit.
Spirit Airlines. A couple of weeks before the Spirit Airlines debacle, um, former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, invested millions of dollars selling Spirit Airlines short. And according to a report that I read, she made $35 million on her short sale of stock because Spirit went belly up. Something smells about that. You know what I mean? Something stinks when someone who may or may not have had inside information is able to score that kind of payday with information that comes um, from their political office, potentially, probably. Remember Thomas Jefferson famously said when he left the office of the president, he said, I leave with my pockets empty. I leave with my pockets more empty than when I came into office. Um, I'm kind of getting away from the idea of the party, but we have a significant problem here, Mike. And I think at least it begins to look like to me like the power that the parties once held. First, they no longer have that amount of power, but they're starting to fray around the edges. Remember when Kamala Harris never ran a primary election, never won a primary election, but she appeared on the Democratic ballot as the opponent to Donald Trump?
Yep.
Remember, we had the one debate where it was a very, very, very poor showing for President Biden, and everyone went from saying he's as sharp as he's ever been, he's the best mental shape, he's better, he's making his staff jump all different ways, he's doing so. And after that debate, there was no doubt that you couldn't hide the mental deficiencies anymore. So they ran around trying to find somebody else, and Biden was forced out, and Kamala Harris was given the nomination. Never once was there a ballot cast for Kamala Harris to be the presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. The results showed she was not terribly popular. But that might be the last gasp of power of the organized political parties. What do you think?
Well, I know there were a lot of disillusioned Democrats that had poured tons of money into her campaign that were saying, well, A, we're never going to run for her, support her again. And now they are leery about supporting anybody. Once you throw significant amount of money down the toilet, it's common emotional feeling to, like you've had it, I don't want to participate anymore.
Yeah.
And instead of just cutting off your email subscriptions that they're sending you junk and text messages, you say, I'm done giving my money, throwing good money after bad. My buddy Stan, I think you met him.
Hmm.
He's from Croatia. And over there, he often thought that America ought to have more like a coalition government
Hmm.
because there are these. You can't just say I'm left or right or I'm Democrat or Republican. We start coming up with terms like libertarian. Libertarianism taken too far is anarchy. Taken too far to the other side, getting rid of libertarianism is like autocracy. So it's these coalitions like they have in other countries. And you mentioned New York State. I'm from New York, but I don't know much about their political system. How many different parties did you say they have?
They 18 or 20, Mike. It's incredible.
It's crazy,
You
right?
remember the guy that was on television? I think he was running for mayor, might have been running for governor, and the name of his party was the Rent is Too Damn High
Yes,
Party.
I remember that guy.
He
That's funny.
registered his he registered his own party and got on the ballot. That's how crazy it is in New York. It can be.
Well, is that an example of what you're talking about? In other words, what it could be like?
No, 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 no. I don't think that. I think what's going to happen is that the political parties will degenerate into more of a local based thing. Maybe it'll be a state party system. Maybe there will be new parties. I don't know how it is in other states, but in Pennsylvania, in order for a political party to appear on the ballot, you have to have 60,000 votes in the last election, or you have to get damn near 60,000 signatures in order to register your party for a particular election. Well, that's a very high bar to, and obviously the incumbency party, that is the Democrats and the Republicans, they vote every year for these kinds of high hurdles for new parties to make the grade because they don't want that much competition. And guys like your buddy Ventry, he had no chance. He had
no, I know.
absolutely no chance of being the guy, the candidate, the one that got all of the political muscle, getting his name recognition built up. Um, the, and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, it's funny. A friend of mine, his son, just ran for the state committee of the Democratic State Committee. And this young man, sadly, born with birth defects, and he's limited to a wheelchair. Pretty bright kid, but he completely unknown in the Democratic Party, and he ran for a state committee seat. If you're not familiar with the state committee, a state committee are kind of like super committee people, and there's people based on population from all 67 counties in the state. And, anywhere from 3 to 10 people in a particular county based on population. Hell, in a very populous county, maybe it's, 12 or 15. And those people get together during state committee meetings, which happens at least once a year. Sometimes they have events that, dinners and things a couple of times a year. But they get together and they get to vote on who the state is going to, or the state party is going to endorse for a certain office. And for governor and lieutenant governor and Senate, U.S. senator, U.S. representative, those things are big deals. And getting the nomination of the party, get your name on the ballot. Because as I told you, if you want to be like if you're the Constitution Party or you're the, fill in the blank party, you have to have had 60,000 votes in the last election in order to have that name automatically on the ballot, or you have to get that many signatures on your nominating petition. And that's a tough thing to do, a really tough thing to do. So um, that's why the Republican and the Democratic parties have this stranglehold on our elections. And that's why the quote state committee people are the ones that hold the power when it comes to the endorsement. Because the one thing the endorsement of the state committee does give you is it gets your name on the ballot. And it's really hard. You were talking about my buddy that ran for governor. Um, he ran a campaign to get elected as state senator when there was a Democrat and a Republican printed on the ballot, and he was able to get the greatest number of votes as a writing candidate to win that election. And it was, to my knowledge, the only time that's ever happened. But that's why it's so tough, because when you're a Republican or a Democrat, you get your name on the ballot. And if you can't get enough people interested in your campaign, people like Mr. Ventry, then you don't really stand a chance.
Yeah, it was interesting when I was running the Vets for Trump thing and doing the interviews. I got introduced to a few Asian markets.
Hmm.
So you have this downtime and you're able to talk to them. And in their countries, at least the ones I remember talking to, they had there was no money that was allowed to be given to them except by the government. And it was based on the position. You had so much money, and then you had airtime on television.
Hmm.
And you had to be given, if you're, say, it's a congressional person and you're going against somebody, you had to give all of them equal time. But he said most of the things that they did was run around on telephone poles and billboards and put up candidates, that they supported. So it wasn't a whole big money game like it is here in America. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Do you think money impedes our election process?
Oh, it definitely persuades. Yeah, I don't know about the impeding. I mean, in some years it's going to be different than others. But yeah, it's definitely I think it's kind of a corrupt thing. I mean, he who has
The
the most money
problem,
wins. Is that any way to run a representative republic? I don't think.
the problem with that, Mike, is that if you don't spend money, you're not going to get name recognition in Podunk, Iowa. You know what I mean?
Let's hear in
So,
America. What I'm talking about is the foreign countries,
yeah,
the
no, no,
way they
no.
do it.
I understand. I understood completely what you're
Okay.
saying. What the point I'm trying to make is that we spend enormous amounts of money on campaigns and elections. Um, that money typically builds name recognition. If people recognize your name, they're much more likely to vote for you than if they don't recognize your name. The second thing that influences people other than name recognition is regions, how close geographic affinity. If you're in the same state or the same county I'm in, I'm more likely to vote for you than somebody that from another county or another state. And I think that money kind of levels the playing field for the non, one of the elections that I watched fairly closely was a Kentucky congressional race where Thomas Massie was running. Massie has his reputation as being a straight shooter, regular guy. He upset Donald Trump, not supporting many of the things that Donald Trump needed to get through the Congress. And Donald Trump endorsed his opponent, even though Massie was the incumbent. Oh, Massie went down by a pretty sizable margin, which again speaks to the influence that Donald Trump has over the Republican Party. But if he had had more money, if Massey had had more money, would he have been able to make up the difference? Because I understand there were some pretty large sums of money spent by Massey's opponent, and the Supreme Court ruled that money equals speech, right?
Hmm.
Because there's always been complaints about people spending too much money in campaigns. We've had campaign finance laws written. There also was some talk, Mike, I don't know if you remember, but there was some talk about not being able to allow personal money into elections at all and have the elections, like you mentioned in your example, where people get a certain amount of time on television, 30 minutes or an hour, and they're equal time to all the candidates. And that was not what people wanted to have done. People with money wanted to have that outsized influence. You all right there, buddy?
Yeah, I was just coughing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Should we beat this up a little bit more? Or do we have our thoughts out in electronic form for people to see?
I've got my thoughts out.
Well, I guess it's time to say the magic words.
Mac and Mike.
Out.
Out.